Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to It Says What, where JW3 and Limud come together to bring you unexpected and poignant Jewish content from across the Jewish community every week before Shabbat. I'm Joe Hyman, JW3's young adult programmer. JW3 is the UK's Jewish Community and Arts Centre. We are partnering to bring you this program with Limud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. Our building is closed, as you know, but we are very much open and continue to offer a broad range of programs to all ages and parts of the community. We are really excited to share that we are working with Limud again to bring you Revelation, a virtual Tikkun Leil Shavuot experience on Wednesday, the 27th of May. It will be a festival where educators, comedians, performers, and musicians come together to explore what we can learn from darkness. This series will ask educators and artists, leaders from across the Jewish community to share a surprising and unexpected piece of Jewish wisdom. To ask your own questions for our text today, please comment on our live feed on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll take them as we discuss them at the end. I'm delighted to welcome one of my own teachers today, Rabbi Alex Israel, who teaches Tanakh at Yeshivat Eretz Hatzvi, Midrash at Lindenbaum, and Matan. He's Director of Community Education, Summer Programs, and the Elmad online learning platform at Pardes, Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem. He was actually born and raised in London, and Rabbi Israel moved to Israel in 1991, receiving smicha from the Israeli Chief Rabbinate after some study at Yeshivat Har Etzion. His first book, Kings 1, Torn in Two, was published in 2013 to great acclaim, and its companion volume, Kings 2, in a Whirlwind, in 2019. Rabbi Israel is a Limud regular and has lectured widely at campuses and communities on 5 continents. His writings may be found at alexisrael.org, and I highly recommend them. Welcome, Rabbi Alex. How are you?
It's great to be with you. So excited. Hold on.
You're
okay,
unmuted.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm delighted to be here with you. And really happy to be having this opportunity to connect from many miles away back to very close to where I grew up.
We're delighted to have you too. We would love to hear about this text that you've shared with me, first of all, but with the rest of the community. It takes place in Jerusalem, the city that you're in right now. So please share it with us. I'll share this on screen while Alex shares this with you.
Okay, so the reason why I chose this text was in honor of Yom Yerushalayim, which is coming up in the upcoming week. And Jerusalem is something which we can't ignore. Whether love it, hate it, it's the center of so much of what goes on. And this is a text which I was asked for a text which has a sort of shock factor to it. And this came to mind. And it's a story about King David. King David wants to build the temple, and he has to dig the foundations. So let's read a little bit about this story. It comes from the Jerusalem Talmud. And it says, V'cheinat motzei, b'shah sheba David lachpor tilmis hamdash. When they began to dig the foundations of the temple, he in translation says, I think not translation, 1,500 cubits. Okay, he got there 1,500 cubits. Not Ishkahoma. It did not reach the deep. What's the deepest?
Sorry, Rabbi Alex. We're just having some sound issues from your side. It's kind of muffled and it's got a lot of feedback. Just wanted to check.
Okay, is this any better?
Much better. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'll go off now.
Okay, thank you. I think that actually might have been that I had a sheet with the text in front of me, and I might have put it on top of the speaker. David digging the foundation, and he's down 1,500 cubits He doesn't find the deep. What is the deep? At the end, I want to remove it. Amalek, let hat yachol. You cannot remove it. Amalek, lama. He said, why? Amalek denahacha kavish. I am here, altahoma, because I am holding back the deep. You know what? I'm going to stop at this point and try and explain what is going on. And this is obviously going to be my interpretation. We have anybody who's ever built a building, right, knows you have to build foundations, and you want to build foundations firm. I assume you want to build them maybe even connected to the bedrock. But there are other reasons why David wants to build his temple on the bedrock, because the temple has to be the purest place, not coming into contact with impurity. And you want to make sure there aren't any bones underneath, there aren't any artifacts which could create impurity. And the best way is to get down to the bedrock, and then you know there's nothing underneath, and you're on solid ground. Now, it could well be that David gets to bedrock, and he finds a piece of pottery. And maybe this was very disappointing to David, because what does pottery mean? Pottery isn't natural. Pottery means that somebody's been here before. There's been another civilization here before David. And he says, let me remove that pottery. And the pottery says, you can remove it. I am straining the deep. What is the deep? Well, if you remember your first verses of the Torah, the first verses of Genesis, it says there that the world was tohu vavohu. The world was full of confusion and chaos, and there was darkness on the face of the deep. You know, if you go to Jerusalem, if you've ever been up to the Temple Mount and you go into the Golden Mosque, there's a big stone there. According to our tradition, that stone stood in the Holy of Holies as well. And they call it the Even Hashtiyah, the foundation stone. Foundation of what? According to some sort of legend or myth, this was the place from which the whole world was created. In other words, what piece of land started the world? Jerusalem. David is trying to dig down to the bedrock, and he finds a piece of pottery and he wants to remove it. And they say, I am restraining the deep, the primeval waters. And David says, right, how long have you been here? And he says, I have been here since God said, I am the Lord of God. At that moment, the earth trembled and began to sink, and I was placed here to restrain the deep. David didn't listen to him. And as soon as he lifted it, the waters of the deep arose and sought to inundate the world. In the rest of the Midrash, what happens is David has to pray. And he has to pray that the waters, because the waters are like going to create a flood and they're going to overwhelm everything. And here's the lovely Midrashic bit here. David says 15 Shir HaMa'alot. La'alot means to go up. He has to sing a song for La Ma'alot. And the Talmud even says Shir Lemea Olot. A song for 100 ascents. So each song he sang, it went down 100 and another 100 and another 100 and another 100 until the water subsided all the way down, and he controlled it. That's the story. David wants to get off the bedrock and remove everything. He tries to remove the pottery. The pottery says, I'm restraining the primeval waters. Anyway, he removes it, he has a flood, and then suddenly he has to go down. What do I think is this? Joe in a minute is going to challenge me on this text, but I'm going to give a first reading. The first reading won't be political. The first reading is going to be related to the nature of Judaism and law. What is this chaos? Society is chaotic. The world is chaos. Nature is chaos. We're currently, human beings' purpose has always been to restrain the forces of nature. whether it's, I don't know, building dam walls, whether it's trying to keep viruses away from ourselves, whatever it might be, we have been trying to restrain the elements. That's why we have and we want to be cool in the summer and we want to be hot in the winter. We try and hold nature at bay. And there's always a threat that this natural world, it's almost threatening to us. But there's something else which is threatening, and that is a deeper chaos in society. And since the time the law was created, since the revelation at Sinai, since God said, I am the Lord your God, in this story, the pottery represents civilization. It's only civilizations that make pottery. And when was that pottery put there? It was put there when God said, I am the Lord your God, at the beginning of the Jewish people. This is claiming that David is almost saying, I want to get back to the beginning. The pottery says, if you try and take away the law, if you try and break the law, if you try and pull out the law, all hell will break loose. And indeed, David does, and all hell breaks loose. And this can be read on so many different levels. It can be read about David simply trying to reach the deeper elements, but law being a protector for society. I say this as we're trying to set up an Israeli government. It might be about leaders feeling that sometimes they are above the law and they can remove the I am the Lord your God. They can remove the 10 Commandments. And the minute a leader tries to move the law, what happens? Suddenly, all hell breaks loose because law protects all of us. And even a leader isn't allowed to remove that pottery because it restrains all of everybody's desires, all the primeval desires. And once David gets submerged by this water, he has to use all his spiritual powers in order to bring the waters down and restore order in the world. Joe, I think you've got some questions or some comments. Can't hear you.
Now I'm unmuted. There we go. Yeah, this text is so rich, and thank you for sharing it with us. It's definitely unexpected. It's definitely surprising that David exhibits this level of control. I'll hold off on a kind of discussion of how this text seems deeply political for later in the discussion. But I just want to ask a textual question to you. What's the significance of this being a shard of pottery? You mentioned that pottery represents civilization, but why couldn't it be something else that represents civilization? Is pottery something specific? And why a broken piece of pottery?
I actually don't know. It's a quite fascinating question. I definitely, and I don't, this isn't my own interpretation, and I wish I could remember who I originally heard this story from and this interpretation of the pottery as representing civilization. But maybe what it's trying to say is this, and maybe I'll take this a layer deeper if we'll use the metaphor here. There's a strong desire to build our temples, to build our religion. We all think that our religion is probing the depths. Our religion has the truth. And the thought that our religion in some way might be some sort of imperfect, broken piece of pottery. We all want to probe that sort of nuclear core, which is called God, which is the deep, which is the creative elements. And David wants to build his temple, which is this shrine, and wants to have it tapping onto that place, that nuclear reactor from where the world came. But we all know that all religions are limited. A halachic system is the way that we practice our religion. But we know that halakha has its rough edges. It discriminates against some people. Some people might not find the prayer book particularly inspiring. And in that sense, I would argue that the piece of pottery which contains the words with which begin the 10 Commandments, I am the Lord your God, which represent the law, sometimes halakha is broken. Halakha, and it's sort of a paradox, because halakha is the vehicle whereby we can keep Shabbat, where we can keep our festivals, where we can practice our laws of Jewish living. And yet, it's funny, it's a broken piece of pottery. It's a broken piece of pottery. It's the tool, but we also have to accept its imperfections. We might not accept them. We might protest its imperfections. We might try and, repair its imperfections. But maybe we need to recognize that, if you want, there is some pure creativity, and the best we can do is to have a piece of pottery, our mode of civilization, which taps into that energy which is below.
That's really, really wonderful. I think also, relating to what you're saying, that imperfection is so key in this text. But also what I love about this text is, contemporary archaeology. You find a shard of pottery that to some would be a piece of tat they wouldn't see on in a jumble sale. But for an archaeologist and someone researching that is a sign of a particular civilization doing something wonderful or living in a particular way. And I think what you're saying about kind of our religious system being imperfect in some way, this seems to say that, to me at least, and I want to kind of hear from what you have to say, that other civilizations have a lot to teach us, especially the ones that are around us in the kind of vicinity and in our history. Does that resonate?
Yes. I mean, in fact, I was actually thinking that this, somebody might come along and say, okay, well, if you've got an imperfect take on truth, then there might be many other people who have alternative, imperfect takes on truth. And I do think that we have this concept that we can learn chokhmah bagoyim, we can learn wisdom from the nations. It's interesting because the Talmud tells us that if they tell you there is Torah in the nations, don't believe them. But if they tell you there is wisdom in the nations, believe them. And it's almost saying that we're sort of playing a double game all the time. We have our own sacred tradition, which we cherish. And that, if you want, is the vehicle whereby we can move forward ourselves in terms of our spiritual journey and the journey of a nation. And those are the stories we tell ourselves. And that is our unique Jewish contribution. And anybody who wants to come in here has to sort of accept the values of our Torah in order to sort of contribute a verse. But at the same time, we recognize there's a lot of wisdom around which we can learn from. And that doesn't need to emerge from Jewish sources.
100%. And that's really wonderful to hear from you and to hear kind of rooted in a text that is in the Talmud. It's also really interesting to me here that David in some ways is seen as someone who's doing something deeply wrong. He's a flawed biblical character, which I know that you are very much, aware of in terms of biblical characters having flaws that we can learn from. But here, the flaw seems to be one of in some way kind of an extremism that reminds me of the way people destroy archaeological artifacts these days, and as a way to kind of hide histories of previous civilizations. And it's happening throughout the world. I think it's happening in Syria with lots of destruction of beautiful and important artifacts of different civilizations. And this seemingly David is that extremist in this. That's not really a question, I suppose, but it's amazing
let me just comment that David is a really multifaceted character. When you read the poetry of David is seen as a poet. It's really it's gentle, it's poignant, it's subtle, it's heartfelt. He's also a warrior. And as a warrior, when you read the pages of the Book of Samuel, he was devastating. And, he was a real warlord. And you need quite a bit of determination, right? He also, as we fully know, had his ethical lines, but he's a human being. And therefore, there were times when, he was corrupted by his own, lower sides and used his power to. So that makes him a very, very. He's a personality who you can study for so long because he's so rich, he's so human in his spirituality. He's an amazing hero, and at the same time, has flaws like all of us human beings.
Mm, totally. And I think that it's really interesting that he's a warrior, but he's also a warrior with an O. He's worried about this piece of pottery affecting the beauty and the perfection of the temple. And I think that really relates to our current moment, this acceptance of chaos. I'd love if you just could speak a little bit more about this acceptance of chaos that's seen in this text as a way of looking through, our current situation.
Right. So I would say like this. Um, there are very maybe I'm going to relate to another story. Um, the rabbis are always pushing against a different type of chaos, right? Um, Sexual chaos, right? Sexual undertones there of the ultra orthodox community, and the rabbis say that once they were given the opportunity to slaughter the Yetzer Hara, the desire, the sexual desire, and whoa, then they'd be able to, move ahead so well. And when they said, be very careful with this sexual desire, imprison it, but don't slaughter it. And they kept it in prison for 3 days. And after 3 days, they looked around the land of Israel and they didn't even find an egg. No hen had laid an egg. In other words, we have powers, we have primeval pulses of energy, life force. And I always find it amazing in the spring, you see what looks like a dead piece of wood, and suddenly it brings forth a branch, a flower. So nature's so powerful. All of our desires are incredibly powerful. And the rabbis realize that even though sexuality can get us into a lot of trouble sometimes, it's essential for our lives. It keeps our families going. It keeps society going. If you get rid of the Yetzer Hara, the sexual desire, you won't have people, having illicit affairs, but you also won't have a next generation. So every type of primeval water has its positive and its negative, right? And it's almost, we've been talking in the Corona era about globalization. Globalization has its blessings, but now we have a virus that has spread around the world. And we're asking ourselves, how do we deal with these energies? This energy we call globalization, it has an equalizing influence. It has, on the other hand, look what it's done, whether we're all connected. So I definitely see, every energy on the one hand needs to be contained. How are we able to siphon or direct the positive sides, but to be able to sort of limit the negative sides? And that's exactly the point about this water. Even in our own world, sometimes water floods. You had in Great Britain earlier this year, last year, those terrible floods when it was raining and raining, worrying about dams collapsing. On the other hand, we obviously need clean drinking water, water for our crops, etc. So I think it's playing on this notion, and David's trying to tap into this energy in a way that he can control it. And the interesting question is, how do you control these energies? Through law, through prayer, through religion, through power.
And I think what's interesting in this is that the way you control it seemingly is with imperfection in some way. It's with a shard that may let some of that primeval energy out and may keep most of it in. I think what I'm feeling about this text is that David attempting to exert too much control on trying to manage that is in some way the difficulty here. I have a question, and this is the kind of political question, but everything is political. This is the kind of about Israel today. This feels like a text that really asks us to respect civilizations that have come before us. What can we learn from this in a political lens of how Israel looks today in relation to the peoples around it, the peoples within its society?
Okay, so I definitely think that you might well argue that if there is one place in the world which is sitting on a sort of tinderbox, which is sitting on a place which could well be waiting to explode, it might be the Temple Mount. And it's just so unbelievable that this text is written and says this place can explode and submerge us. And indeed, I think that might well be true about the Temple Mount here in the year 2020, and it would. There's something very fascinating here. Now, David here, as I say, is trying to dig down and say, no one was here before us. I want to dig down and find that we're the first people who have been here. He's disappointed to see this civilization which was there before him, which clearly wasn't his. And I think what you're alluding to, Joe, is the idea that we might, how does we as Jews, as Zionists, if you are Zionist, but I certainly am, relate to the fact that there are other peoples who live here who feel like this place belongs to their tradition as well. And it's interesting to hear the potsherd actually talking to David and saying, I belong here, don't remove me. And he ignores it, right? And maybe that's a tendency of power to try and sweep these things away. But in David's case, it was a terrible mistake. You know, it's this very interesting, this zero-sum game. And maybe this is where tragedies happen. You know, Joe, you were talking before about the idea of, you know, the broken potsherd. I was thinking about it. Politics in general is a broken potsherd. You know, we all know that our elected leaders, they're not perfect. In fact, they're deeply flawed in so many cases, but a government is better than no government, right? Likewise here, the aspiration to sweep away and have this sort of totality, only my truth, raises complete hell and high water, if I will take this metaphor. And at some level, I think the only way we're ever going to have peace in this land, in our current land of Israel, is if we each recognize each other's truths at some level. How we're going to sort it out in a political sense, I don't know. It's interesting that we're both playing a game a little bit, the Israelis and Palestinians, where we deny each other's past. It's a well-documented fact that the Palestinians in today's world say that the temple never stood on the Temple Mount. It actually stood where the Kotel was. And I can understand it from their perspective. How could it be that the Jews were on the Temple Mount? That's Islamic land. And likewise, many people want to see the Palestinians have no right on the Temple Mount or in this land at all. And I do believe, I don't know how we're going to solve this current conflict, which has been bubbling for so long. But I have a feeling, since both our people and the Palestinian people are not going anywhere so fast, that the beginning of a solution is to recognize the potsherd. It's for them to recognize that we have a history here, and for us to recognize that they have a history here. And the minute we can recognize those truths, first of all, I think what comes with that is also a mutual respect, that we're respecting the other side, and that they do belong here. By the way, let me add that even King David himself didn't build Jerusalem from scratch. He captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites. He knew he wasn't the first one there. And we all maybe need to have a little bit of humility and allow a little room for the other. And maybe that will afford a little bit of breathing space for some compromise or some mutual recognition. Maybe I'm talking in messianic terms because sometimes people don't seem to have the generosity of spirit to recognize these things.
That is a really beautiful message to end on. It's really amazing, and I want to kind of highlight the point that you mentioned about the potsherd speaking, and the idea that history has a voice. There are people behind that, imperfect people and imperfect civilizations that we can learn from. I think I have so much to say about our political climate in Israel, but also more globally. And the way that we should respect other civilizations, other people, but also respect our imperfections and accepting chaos. There's so much in this short text, and it's really, really wonderful to hear you share it. Thank you so much, Rav Alex, for coming virtually on It Says What. We've really, really enjoyed your voice.
Thank you for inviting me.
I look forward to learning with you in the future.
Please God, we will all be able to be together, not only on Zoom, but in person very, very soon. Shabbat Shalom.
Wonderful. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Please join us next week, where we'll have Lainey Solomon speaking. And also, please join us for Revelation, the virtual Tikkun Leil Shavuot experience brought to you by JW3 and Limud on the 27th of May, a late-night festival of performance, of educating, of comedy and music, exploring darkness and what we can learn from it. The ticket link is in the chat on Facebook right now. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and be well.